Freedom of assembly. Freedom of assembly consists of the right to assemble and associate. The right to assemble consists of the right to gather together in order to make a statement. This freedom includes the right to picket, the right to have a protest, and even something as simple as the right to have your homecoming parade. But it is subject to reasonable limits. So the meaning is the right to come together to make a statement. It includes the right to a picket, which means just protest with a sign, parade, and the right to protest. It is subject to reasonable limits, time, place, and manner restrictions. You cannot protest in the middle of the night through a neighborhood. You're disturbing the peace. But you should be able to protest at any reasonable time of the day. Place. You cannot protest on private property without permission. The place must be public. The manner. You don't have to necessarily have a nice message, like Westboro Baptist Church does not have a nice message, but the manner is not necessarily violent, and you can't protest or assemble in an effort to like rally people to kill people. Okay, so the manner um, has to be right. Balance freedom and order. So you got to make sure again that freedom and order is protected. You can't harass, and that leads us to this picture right here. If you can see this yellow line, right? This is a yellow circle that is surrounding an abortion clinic. In some states, they have put this circle around abortion clinics so people can go up to the Planned Parenthood, if that's where they're going, and walk in without being harassed, or what they would consider harassed, by a pro-life protester. And then, of course, the pro-life protesters say that this is a violation of the freedom of speech, that they should be able to talk to people walking up to the door. But it has been determined that this whole thing balances freedom and order. You have the freedom to let your message be heard, but the person who is getting the abortion has the right to not feel like they're in danger. And it also prevents any violent protesters from attacking the clinics. You do have the right to associate with people who share a common interest and provide a basis for people to form interest groups, and this provides a basis for people to form interest groups in political parties. So we can't tell you can't associate. But in that case, we can say that some private organizations do have the right to select their membership. In the case of Boy Scouts of America versus Dale, the Supreme Court said that the Boy Scouts, being a private group, does have the right to deny membership of gay troop leaders. So, whereas we can't tell you can't assemble, like the KKK can assemble, there can be a Nazi party, but we also can't, you can, as a group, say that certain members or certain types of people can't be involved with your group. Alright, right to bear arms. Really doesn't, this is moving on into the Second Amendment, but didn't really want to make a whole entire slideshow just for the Second Amendment. Second Amendment right to bear arms has only come up in the Supreme Court a few times. The NRA is a huge interest group with one of the largest memberships and a lot of influence over campaigns of Congress members and the president. They endorse a lot of candidates. They give candidates ratings. The NRA is so important that it's up there twice. Well, that's not right. Hold on. That's all flubbed up. Hold on. Oh boy. Alright, I'm going to pause it for a second and see if I can't restart it to where it... Haha, I got it. All right, so the Supreme Court and lower courts and circuit courts have had to determine whether the Second Amendment really means that individuals have the right to bear arms or state militias have the right to bear arms. And in past cases and in lower courts, what typically is decided is that the Second Amendment does not give people an individual right to own weapons. But there has been some change in that case. There is an evolution of gun rights, and it's in the Constitution because it was essential for us to work as militias to overthrow the British government. But since we really don't have militias anymore, and we have National Guard units and we have police forces, do we still need individuals to own weapons so they could go out and fight our imperial masters? Um, and the determination has been a little bit of a mixed bag. And then the questions asked is that does controlling access to guns really reduce crime? If you allow certain people to have guns, are they going to keep criminals from invading somebody's home? Or if you give somebody access to guns, is that going to cause more criminality? Um, the questions are still up in the air. There have been a few cases, very few cases. Um, In 1934, U.S. versus Miller, there was a question of the constitutionality of the National Firearms Act. And the Supreme Court determined that Congress, under the Commerce Clause, has the right to regulate the sale of weapons because all guns could essentially travel over state lines. So the Supreme Court did say that Congress can do what it wants when making gun control law. In U.S. versus Lopez, I don't want you to think of this, and I put this here because this is not about a guns rights case. It is about limiting the power of the federal government in determining gun law under Commerce Clause. In D.C. versus Heller, the Supreme Court, in a decision written by Scalia, who loves the Second Amendment and would like to protect people's gun rights, said that states and localities cannot prevent somebody from owning weapons. Okay, and then the last topic is a right to privacy. And the right to privacy incorporates the First, the Third, the Fourth, the Fifth, the Ninth, and the 14th Amendments. So privacy is not in the Constitution. Nowhere does it say the word privacy. The Supreme Court has expanded the Bill of Rights with the guise of the 14th Amendment, Selective Incorporation Doctrine 2, to give people a right to privacy from the 4th, 5th, 9th, and 14th Amendments. Katz versus United States is one of those cases that deals with the right to privacy. Katz versus US was about wiretapping a payphone. The Supreme Court determined in this case that the government could not wiretap a phone or take information acquired when you believe that you have a right to privacy. And if the government wants to take that information, they must get a search warrant. Griswold versus Connecticut. Griswold versus Connecticut. Excuse me. Sorry. The Griswold versus Connecticut deals with the protected right to privacy, especially marital privacy. In this case, Griswold was subscribing birth control pills to married couples in Connecticut through the mail. And they were arrested. The doctors, or Griswold, I think they were a married couple, but the Griswold was arrested and said that they weren't doing anything wrong because there should be a protected right to privacy. That you should be right to be free from government invasion and intrusion with matters of sexuality, and to not have the government make your private life decisions for you. And the Supreme Court agreed. So in Griswold versus Connecticut, the Supreme Court agreed that you should be free in thought and belief from government regulations, and that you have a distinct right to privacy over your body. Griswold versus Connecticut led to the decision of Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade determined that in your first trimester of pregnancy, it is unconstitutional for a state to interfere with heavy regulations or limits to abortion because it's interfering with the woman's right to privacy. In the second trimester, the state now has an interest in protecting the women's health and may start to regulate abortions. In the third trimester, the state has an interest in protecting an unborn fetus that can survive outside the womb, so the state can ban abortions at this stage unless the woman's life is at risk. Now, some of Roe v. Wade was restricted in the 1990s case of Planned Parenthood versus Casey. This was supposed to be the case that reversed Roe v. Wade, but it didn't. Instead, it determined that the state may regulate abortion without placing an undue burden on the woman. So the state can start to regulate abortions more heavily in the first and second trimester as long as they didn't prevent a woman from having access. Okay. Also, right to privacy has moved into sexual orientation rights. In the case of Bowers versus Hardwick, the court ruled that if you were a same-sex couple, that a state could make laws that prevented you from being able to have sexual relationships with the same-sex partner. That was reversed in Lawrence versus Texas. In Lawrence versus Texas, the court struck down a Texas ban, and Justice Kennedy wrote a majority opinion claiming that any law that had a ban on same-sex relationships it violated independence and privacy. Okay. And Thomas and Scalia appropriately predicted that the decision of Lawrence versus Texas would end up leading to an overturning of any laws against same-sex marriage. Okay, and that's it. That's right to privacy, Second Amendment rights, and assembly and petition.